let's comment all this out using the multi-line comment. And here, let's try something different. What if we wanted to evaluate two values at the same time? So some value is greater than 20, and we want to make sure that some other value is greater than 20 as well. So the double ampersands together are the AND operator, which means this expression and this expression have to both equate to true, and if they do, then you can execute and satisfy that case. Here's another option. We can use the OR, which are two pipe symbols. The pipe symbol is over the backslash character on your keyboard. So if it's equal to 24, or the other value is equal to, whoops, I already went back on what I told you to do. Let's do that. Other value equals 24. Then, alert. Let's go ahead and just move that ending multi-line comment down one. So now, if this is true, or this is true, then execute this block of code. All right, and at least one of those were true. And while you may not think that this is all that useful, you will be using this quite frequently in your applications. You need to be able to branch to decide and make logic decisions in your applications whether you should perform this operation or that operation. We'll see that as our examples get a little more complicated. Okay, so let's just move this down a little more. And I want to talk about one more thing with regards to the equality operators. Up to this point, we've been looking at just either 2 or 3 values to see if they equal a given value, right? But you can also do the opposite. So this is if some value is equal to 24, you can say if some value is not equal to 24, in which case then if this equates to true, then execute this block of code. All right, so it's either that if you're using the evil operators, or that and exclamation mark with 2 equal signs if you're using the good equality operator. All right, next up, we also want to talk about, let's redefine some value as false. And now we can just do, here, let's comment this out. If not some value. All right, so this is roughly the equivalent of saying if some value is false. We can just do this instead, and it's the exact same thing. Okay? All right, and you'll see all of these used often in code examples in books and online as well. All right, so let's move on to another type of logic statement, the ternary operator or conditional operator. It evaluates an expression, and it will either it'll either give you, let's do this, one value or another based on whether the evaluation is truthy or falsy, and we'll talk about those ideas in just a moment. So my result equals some value equal to 24 equal not equal. All right, and then alert my result. Let's run this first just to make sure it works, and then I'll talk about what it does. All right, and it says that those are indeed equal. All right, so this conditional or ternary operator is checking this expression. And if the expression is truthy, then it will return this portion of the operator. Otherwise, if it's falsy, it will return this portion of the operator. So in this case, this expression equated to true, therefore it took the value, the literal string equal, and assigned it to the variable myResult. And that's what got printed out in our alert box. Okay? All right, so let's now talk about what truthy and falsy really are. Admittedly, I don't know every language that's ever been created, but in my experience, JavaScript has this unique idea of truthy versus falsy values. So there are values that are considered falsy. Things like the value false, which is the Boolean value false, not the string value false with double quotes around it, okay? Then also undefined. So when a variable has no value, that's considered falsy. The number 0 is considered falsy. And then also the not a number, NaN, which you'll see if you were to take a value and divide it, a numeric value and divide it by a string, you'll get not a number as a response, and that's considered a falsy value. If it's not for that false, undefined 0 or not a number, it's considered truthy instead. So here, let's have some fun with this notion. In fact, I'm going to show you a new feature of our F12 developer tool. So make sure that you are currently set up to see the F12 developer tools in Internet Explorer. What we're going to do is go to the console tab. And if you see in the console tab, there's this little area to type in at the very bottom of the window. That's what we're going to work in. So I'm going to do something like this. So myResult equals false. All right, so I don't have that in parentheses, but I certainly could do that. That expression will equal false, right? No doubt about it. So is that truthy or is that falsy? All right. So notice in the console window, we can execute just individual lines of JavaScript. It's pretty neat. In this case, when I executed this line of JavaScript, it returned the value falsy because indeed false is a falsy value. All right, let's do something else kind of interesting here. First of all, let's just see what happens when we do type of 24 divided by Bob, okay? And we'll get the value not a number. All right, so if I were to do this, myResult equals 24 divided by Bob. And now I'm going to evaluate whether it's truthy or falsy. And it returns falsy. Why? Because not a number is a falsy value. Furthermore, let's do this. So we're going to look at the value undefined. Is it truthy or falsy? It's falsy. Now, let's do this. myResult. So you can see this console is a great way to just experiment with JavaScript and to learn the syntax, especially when you're just trying to learn one statement, one line of code at a time. All right, so finally, here's what I want to do. Type of some undefined variable All right, so what's the type of some undefined variable? It should be undefined. So we would expect what? It to be falsy? Well, it's truthy. How is that even possible? Well, the type of operator returns a string value, and the string value in this case is the word, the literal string, undefined, and therefore that is a truthy value. Everything that's not a number, 0, false, or what was our other one there? The value undefined is going to be truthy. Okay, so that's a little bit of a gotcha there at the very end. Very good. Let's move on here. want to talk about the difference between the 3 equal signs and the 2 equal signs. Let me just illustrate this with another one of these. So 3 is equal to 3. So 3, the number, is equal to the string of 3. Is that true? Or is that false? Whoops, I typed that out a little bit incorrectly there. I needed an equal sign. Sorry about that. This should work. Ah, there we go. True. But they're not the same. One is a number and one is a string, like we learned when we were talking about variables. Well, that is the issue with the equality operator that only uses 2 equal signs. It will coerce one of the values or both of them to try to get them to match up. Whereas if we use 3, like so, it will not attempt to coerce the data types so that the values are equal. It'll say, one's a number, one's a string, you're on your own, buddy, okay? So that is the fundamental difference. It also applies to the not equal in both cases as well. All right, so just keep that in mind. So I guess the moral of the story is that many JavaScript experts would say you should never, or infrequently at least, use the 2 equal sign or the bang equal sign for equality instead of preferring the triple equal sign or the bang equal sign for inequality. Okay. All right, so let's continue on here. Let's do one final example. Let's talk about the switch statement. And the switch statement is a lot like the if statement, except it's laid out a little cleaner for some scenarios. Otherwise, it's pretty much can be used interchangeably. And here I'm going to use document.write. We haven't used this yet. And it's just going to append some information inside of the web page itself. It's not going to pop open an alert box. It'll just write it at the very top of our HTML page. Okay, and so in this case, let's save this and let's double click. And you can see that this message displayed because when evaluating username in the switch statement, it looked for each case, and once it found the case that applied to it, it executed that line of code. We add a break statement to jump out of any further evaluation of our switch statement and continue executing any code that comes after it. Like we had earlier when we were working with the else statement by itself, we said that was a catch-all. Similarly, we have a default statement, so if nothing else applied, so for example, if we were to just add a number after Rimmer's name and then execute this, we would see the default condition would apply. All right, and you can get this to do some pretty silly things, like evaluate two conditions in the case rather than just one in the following extreme code example. And I'm going to go ahead and do this because we're going to get to see a built-in object to JavaScript called the date object. And here's where it gets silly. I'm going to evaluate the value of true, and now we just have to find the case that will match up and equate to true, or evaluate as true. So here we're able to use the AND operator to test a first case. Is current hour between 8 and 12? If so, write this message. So let's see what we get here. All right, so the strategy, again, just to recap this, is to find the case that equates to true. And once we find that case that equates to true, it's kind of a reverse from what we were attempting to do here. The matching is kind of in the reverse order. So let's see how this works. All right, and since this is the afternoon, after lunch when I'm recording this video, I see this message. All right, great. All right, so I think that we have definitely covered the fundamentals of conditional logic in JavaScript, and we talked about quite a few things, not the least of which were the if, else if, else statement, the ternary or conditional operator, the switch statement, like we just looked at, some different variations on all of those, looking at the and the or operators, looking at the equality operators, greater than, less than, not. We didn't talk about not greater than, but you can just put an exclamation mark greater or an exclamation mark less, greater or equal to, less than or equal to. We talked about the difference between 2 equal signs and 3 equal signs. One will coerce the data and one won't. That's why the double equal sign is considered evil. We looked at a bunch of different cases. We looked at the console window inside of the F12 tools and how useful that is just for executing some simple code that we want to see what will happen and what we'll evaluate it to. And then we talked extensively about truthy and falsy values in JavaScript, kind of a unique notion. All right, so we're doing great. I know these are long videos to start off with, but the concepts will start becoming easier now that we have a lot of the fundamentals under our belt. We'll see you in the next video. You're doing great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. In this lesson, we're going to talk about functions. We'll look at some simple cases of functions, and we'll look at passing arguments to functions. We'll look at the argument object that allows us to pass in an infinite number of arguments into a function. Then we'll look at some advanced cases, looking at function literals, so assigning an entire function to a variable and then using that variable all over the place to call into that function. And then we'll also talk about anonymous functions, functions that have no name. So a function is simply a block of code that's executed as a complete unit of work. It's typically used to organize code that you'll want to reuse over and over within your application. It's also good for organizing a given piece of functionality or chunk of functionality into a single spot, give it a name, and then be able to use it from anywhere within your application. Now that's the most simple definition I can provide. As you get into the more complex cases, that doesn't always ring true. There's other reasons to create functions, but we'll leave that for another time. There's also one other note that we're not going to talk about in this video with regards to functions, and that is variables that are defined within functions using the var keyword. We've already alluded to the var keyword a little bit earlier about function scope and global scope. Still don't want to get into that topic just yet. We'll get to that soon. I'll reserve a whole video for that topic a little bit later. All right. So let's start off with our usual work here. Let's open up Notepad and then get our template in there, and then we'll want to save as c9js07.html, and let's change this to, and we'll copy that and put it in our h1. Now we're all set. Let's get our script tags in place. Great. And then also we don't want to forget our type equals text / JavaScript. Great. All right. Again, I'm going to leave the indentation all the way to the left for my own convenience, pointing out that that is not the way you typically want to write your code. You want to use indentations. Okay. But at any rate, let's go ahead and start and create a very simple function. We'll use the keyword function, and we'll give it a simple name, my new function. Typically, you want to give your functions meaningful names. This is not a very meaningful name, but hopefully they'll suffice for the moment. And now, inside of the function, inside of the opening and closing curly braces that define this block of code, we're going to give this block of code a name, or rather, we've already given it a name, my new function. Now we're going to give it some functionality, and we're just going to keep it easy. Now, to invoke my new function, all I need to do is call it by its name. Using the opening and closing parentheses, these are the function invocation operator, like we talked about earlier. We'll talk about their purpose here in just a moment when declaring or defining the function. Let's go ahead and save and make sure that we have JavaScript working at this point. Awesome, we do. All right, so we could call our function from here, or if we were to, for example, input type equals button, or submit rather, on click equals my new function, and let's put the value equals click me. All right, so you saw from that example that I was able to execute this function when our document loaded, and then also whenever I clicked the click me button. So it's reusable code. It can be used multiple times. Great. So that's the first version, our simple version of our function. All right, let us define a new function. We'll give it the same name. But this time I'm going to add an argument to the function. And an argument is a parameter that's passed into the function for use inside of the function. So this is how I'm going to use it in this case. Now I can use it in many different ways depending on the value I expect to be passed in and what I hope to do with it once I get a hold of it. It's used much like a variable. So whatever value is, and I can name it anything I want. Let's name it my value just to prove that. Let's change that to my value. All right. Now, whenever I go to call my new function, I need to pass it a value. In this case, I'm passing it a string value of partner. And I want to make sure to spell it correctly. There we go. Howdy partner. Great. All right, so we're able to define an argument and then use the argument's value inside of the body of our function. Great. All right, let's take a little departure here and let's create a simple function called add. We have 2 arguments, and I can define as many arguments as I want to when I declare or define my function. In this case, I'm going to return the result of first number plus second number. This return value means once it's called, it's going to return back some value, or we could just remove that altogether and it will prematurely come to the end of execution. So there might be some lines of code like we saw when we were looking at the if statement earlier. We might have additional code here, or we can circumvent it by calling the return early. In this case, I'm going to return a value from a function. And so I'll do this now. Var my result equals add 1 and 2. And then we'll go alert my result. And we get the result of 3. Great. So again, we can pass in more than one parameter, and then we can return a value at the end of the execution of the function. We can capture the value that's been returned and save it into a variable. And in this case, I'm merely displaying that variable in an alert box. Great. Let's continue on. Now I can define a different version of my add method or add function that will allow me to pass any number of arguments into it, and it will add them all. So here I'm going to create a temporary value. I'm going to assign it the value of 0. Automatically, whenever you create a function, it has a built-in object that we can reference called the arguments object, and it will have every value passed in through the arguments for the given function. So you can go ahead and pass as many arguments as you want to in a function, and we can then, even if you don't define them in the function themselves. Now I'm going to use some odd looking syntax. We're going to come back to this syntax later when we talk about looping. Don't want to talk about what it does just at the moment. Just know that we're going to loop around and look at every argument that is passed into our add method. And again, we'll talk about this for loop a little bit later. Also, I'm going to use this strange open square bracket, close square bracket syntax. And we'll talk about what that does again a little bit later. It's an array. And we'll talk about arrays in its own video. But for now, let's just look at the fact that there's an argument object that lets us add as many different arguments as we want to. So we can do add 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 together, okay? And we could keep going if we wanted to. But let's see what that gets us.